All I wanted to hear that day was a single, simple phrase. Thank you. Just that. Nothing more. But the words that came back to me were the exact opposite of what my heart longed to hear. Mom, about the trip, would you mind not coming this time? For a moment, I felt as if time itself had frozen solid. The hand that had been drying a dinner plate stopped mid-wipe, suspended in the air. I thought I must have misheard him. I looked up at my son's face, searching for some sign that it was all a misunderstanding. But his eyes held a clear, unwavering message. A firm resolve. He meant it. He did not want me to come. Oh, I see. Yes, of course. I understand. I managed to force a smile as I said it. I thought it was what I was supposed to do. A mother is supposed to smile. A mother must be strong, always. But in that precise moment, I heard the sound of something inside of me quietly, irrevocably, crumbling to dust. For 10 years, I had dedicated my life to them. I woke up every morning before the sun to pack his lunch. I picked up my grandson from school every single afternoon. If he came down with a fever, I would sit by his bed all night, changing the cool cloth on his forehead. On the nights my son and his wife would argue, their voices muffled but sharp through the walls, I would lie down next to my grandson, rubbing his small back in slow, soothing circles, until his tense little body finally relaxed into sleep. I love you, Grandma. That one little sentence was my entire world. For the promise of hearing it, I had gladly offered up all the years of my retirement, every last moment of my own time. And yet, was this how it was always meant to end? With the words, "Would you mind not coming?" Is that the final destination for a mother? Later that night, as I stood alone in the kitchen washing the last of the dishes, I heard a faint sound over the steady rush of water from the faucet. A small, distinct plink, like a single drop falling onto the porcelain sink. I didn't realize it was the sound of my own tear until a second one broke free and traced a warm path down my cheek. So, I'm not needed anymore, am I? The whispered words were swallowed by the low hum of the exhaust fan, reaching no one, heard by nothing but the silent, empty room. A few days later, my son and his family left for their vacation in Florida. They didn't ask me to come with them to the train station to see them off. They didn't ask for anything at all. I just sat on the living room sofa, listening to the solid click of the front door as it closed behind them. I watched their backs through the window as they walked to the car, carrying their suitcases. My grandson didn't even turn around to wave goodbye. It was as if I wasn't there. As if, to them, I had never existed at all. That night, a fever took hold of me. It came on fast and fierce. Alone in the quiet house, I made myself an ice pack and placed it on my forehead. I sipped lukewarm Gatorade from a glass by my bed, my hand trembling slightly. I just stared up at the blank white ceiling, and a thought drifted into my mind. Maybe it would be easier if I just didn't wake up tomorrow. Duckly. But then, as if from nowhere, my grandson's face appeared in my mind's eye. His tiny hand clutching my finger, his innocent, gap-toothed smile, the soft, rhythmic sound of his breathing as he'd fall asleep while I read him a story. "Grandma, I don't want you to be gone." The memory of his little voice echoed deep in my ears, and in that instant, I scolded myself. "What are you thinking, you foolish old woman? Stop feeling sorry for yourself. It's not over, not yet." But then, just a few hours later, my cell phone shattered the silence of the night. It buzzed and rang insistently on the nightstand. I looked at the screen. It was my son's name. For a heartbeat, I hesitated. My thumb hovered over the screen. But then, with a hand that still shook, I answered the call. "Mom, please, you have to come. You have to come right away. Leo." He collapsed. My son's voice was breaking on the other end, choked with sobs and raw panic. And the very next day, he fell to his knees right there in front of me. My name is Eleanor Vance. I turned 70 this year. I live in a small, quiet town in upstate New York. I lost my husband when I was 58 years old. I remember so clearly how the entire landscape of my life began to quietly, subtly change from that day forward. My husband was a good, gentle man. He wasn't a man of many words, but he was the kind of person who would be out pulling weeds in the garden and then come inside, wordlessly handing me a cold can of soda just because he thought I might be thirsty. After he was gone, it felt as if all the sound had been drained from our little house. About 3 years had passed since I'd buried him. 3 years of silence. It was around that time that I made a decision. A firm one. I decided I would sell our house and begin the process of moving into a retirement community. It seemed like the best path forward. The most sensible way to live out my remaining years quietly, without being a burden to anyone. I wasn't seeing people much anymore, and even the simple act of standing in the kitchen to cook a meal for one had started to feel like a monumental effort. I went down to the county office and collected a stack of glossy brochures. I even went on a few tours of the local facilities, nodding politely at the cheerful staff. I gathered all the necessary paperwork, filled out the forms, and got everything in order. All that was left was to sign on the dotted line and mail it in. The day came. I was sitting alone at my kitchen table. The final application forms spread out before me. I was about to sign my name, to sign away the rest of my life. And at that very moment, the phone rang. I picked up the receiver, and a familiar voice came spilling into my ear. "Mom, I need to ask you for a favor. A really big one. Could you come and stay with us?" It was my son, Michael. His voice was laced with something I hadn't heard in a long time. A hint of anxiety. A desperate need to lean on someone. "We're having a baby, Mom. And we need your help. I need your help." I slowly, deliberately put down the ballpoint pen I was holding. I looked at the application form on the table in front of me, at the empty line waiting for my signature. And then, quietly, I picked it up, and I tore it in half. The soft, ripping sound of the paper felt like a ceremony, like a definitive severing of one future to make way for another. The sound echoed deep inside my soul. "Glash May, I am still needed." The thought was so powerful, so overwhelming, that it gave me the strength to make my choice. Because of that feeling, I decided to leave everything behind and go to them, to that house. To be perfectly honest, I was terrified. A new home. Living with a young couple with their own ways of doing things. Helping to raise a child from scratch. Could an old woman like me really be of any use? But deep down, a part of me was rejoicing. A part of me felt a thrill I hadn't felt in years. Finally, it's my turn again. Finally, I have a role to play. I can be useful to someone again. I can live for someone else. Eve, and now, when I think back on that feeling, a warmth spreads through my chest. I'll never forget the day my grandson Leo was born. His tiny, wrinkled hands, his fragile, piercing cry. The incredible warmth of his little body the first time I held him in my arms. In that moment, I felt like I had become a mother all over again. And so began the next 10 years of my life. For 10 years, I dedicated every ounce of my time, every fiber of my being, to my grandson. My days started at 5:30 in the morning. I'd make breakfast for Michael and his wife Sarah, pack Leo's lunch for school, put a load of laundry in before driving him to the bus stop. After school, I'd help him with his homework, cook dinner for the family, and at night, I'd read him stories until he drifted off to sleep. When he was sick with a fever, I would spend the night by his side, constantly changing the cool washcloth on his forehead. On the day of his school's field day, I was the first one up, driving to the park in the pre-dawn dark to save a good spot on the lawn for our family. My own doctor's appointments were postponed. Getting my hair cut was an indulgence I no longer had time for. A vacation? I haven't been on one in over a decade. Even my friendships faded away. The simple pleasure of having coffee with a friend became a distant memory, something that belonged to another life. But I never once thought of it as a hardship. Not for a second. "Thanks, Grandma." Those words, and the bright smile that always came with them, were all I needed. They could make me feel strong enough to do it all over again the next day. But sometimes, just for a moment, a shadow would fall across my heart. It would happen late at night, after I'd tucked myself into bed, the house finally quiet. He, how long can this go on? My eyesight was getting worse, and a dull, persistent ache had settled in my knees. I could feel my body changing, slowing down, but I couldn't bring myself to say anything to anyone. I was terrified that if I ever admitted, "I'm tired," the place I had worked so hard to earn in this family would be taken away from me. I was so afraid of being alone again, so I kept a smile permanently fixed on my face. No matter how exhausted I was, no matter how much my joints ached. One evening, after dinner, Leo crawled into my lap. "Grandma," he said, looking up at me with his serious little face. "The food doesn't taste good when you're not here to make it." In that moment, I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but I knew that if I started crying, something important would shatter. So I just held him, wrapping my arms around his small frame, tighter and tighter. "Thank you, my sweet boy. Grandma will always do her best for you." I truly believed it. I built my life around a set of unwavering beliefs. If I just endure a little, the family can be happy. As long as my grandson grows up healthy and strong, that's all that matters. Dedicating myself to my family is a mother's final duty. But I was wrong. All of those things are only true if the relationship is one where that dedication is valued. I didn't realize that until that day, the day those words were spoken to me. "Mom, this time, would you mind not coming?" With that one short sentence, my 10 years of devotion were repainted, transformed into the actions of a burdensome, unwanted presence. That night, I opened my old journal. Its pages were filled with the small, simple joys of the past decade. The day Leo took his first steps. The day he wore his little suit for the family pictures. A high fever tonight. I rubbed his back until he fell asleep, crying on his first day of preschool. I had recorded everything. Every little moment, because those 10 years were the most precious, most love-filled years of my entire life. But now, looking back, I wonder, maybe for the last 10 years, I wasn't really a member of the family. Maybe I was just a convenience. And yet, even then, a part of me still wanted to believe that one day they would understand. One day they would see that all of this love I had given would eventually reach them. But reality was colder and far more cruel than I could have ever imagined. The picture of family I had held so dearly in my heart was nothing like the one I was actually living in. It was 2 days after I had been told not to come. Late afternoon. I was standing at the kitchen counter, just as I always did, stirring a pot of beef stew on the stove while prepping vegetables for the next day's lunches. I was rubbing salt into a cucumber when I heard footsteps behind me. My son, Michael, spoke my name softly. "Mom, can we talk for a minute?" I stopped what I was doing and turned around. His expression was uneasy. He couldn't seem to meet my eyes. In that instant, a cold, sharp dread pierced through me. "What is it, dear?" I asked, forcing a smile onto my face. Michael glanced up for just a fraction of a second before his eyes darted away again. "It's about the trip," he said. "I just wanted to let you know, you don't need to come this time. We thought you could use the time to rest and relax." He said it so casually, as if he were simply relaying a piece of information that had been decided long ago. For a moment, I couldn't find any words. The family vacation. I had been looking forward to it for months. The first trip for all 3 generations of our family. The first time seeing Florida. We had been planning it since the spring. I had even knitted a little straw hat for Leo. I'd bought myself a new sun hat too. Thinking, for once, maybe I'll be in the pictures instead of just taking them. But now, all of it, all those quiet, happy daydreams vanished into thin air, as if they had never existed at all. "Oh, is that so? Well, all right then. I understand." I made my voice as bright and cheerful as I possibly could. It took a surprising amount of effort to keep the smile from faltering. "It's important for you and Sarah to have some time to yourselves. Don't you worry about me. I'll keep busy here. I can finally get to all the weeding in the garden." As I spoke, I turned back to the counter and picked up the cucumber again. The cold, gritty feeling of the salt seemed to seep through my fingertips and straight into my heart. Why? Why can't I go? The question rose in my throat a dozen times, hot and desperate. But in the end, I couldn't bring myself to ask it. Not once. After my son told me I wasn't needed on the trip, I smiled and said I understood. But behind that smile, my mind was racing, asking the same questions over and over again. Did I do something wrong? Did I inconvenience them in some way? Could it be that they just see me as a nuisance now? If I had asked, maybe I would have gotten an answer. But what if that answer was colder than I could imagine? What if it confirmed that I was even more of an unwelcome presence than I already feared? I don't think I could have recovered from that. I don't think my heart could have borne the weight of that truth. Sometimes, a person chooses silence over the truth. It isn't always an act of cowardice. Sometimes, it is the last line of defense, a desperate attempt to keep a wound from being torn open any wider. So I just stood there, in the soft afternoon light filtering through the kitchen window, and I kept my hands busy. I silently chopped vegetables and prepared the evening meal, just like any other day. I never said, "I want to go." I never said, "Please let me come." I didn't ask, why? Not because I lacked the courage, but because my heart already knew the answer. It knew that once the truth was spoken aloud, there would be no going back. That night, I couldn't sleep. The quiet, rhythmic breathing of the sleeping household filled the air. I slipped out of bed, put on my slippers, and went out into the backyard. It was one of those humid, heavy nights just before the summer rains begin. But the air had a slight chill to it, and the sound of water dripping from the leaves of the trees, plip, plip, only amplified the profound silence. I picked up the small watering can and began to water the hydrangeas lining the fence. "You don't need to come this time." The words played on a loop in my head, again and again. Was I a burden? Or were they just being considerate, thinking of me? Either way, the conclusion was the same. I had become someone who was better off not being there. That felt like the only possible answer, and the thought was a tight band around my chest, squeezing the air from my lungs. The soil at my feet was damp. It wasn't just from the humidity. I think it was also from something else that had fallen there, drop by drop. When the plan for this trip was first made, I had secretly marked the date on our calendar. It was a simple little desk calendar that hung on the kitchen wall, its pages already slightly faded. On the date of their departure, I had drawn a small circle in red pen, and underneath it I'd written, "Florida trip." The whole family. It was my own private little joy, a small beacon of light that helped me through the long days. Whenever I was planning the week's meals, I'd think, I wonder what kind of food we'll eat in Florida. While hanging laundry on the line, I'd find myself thinking, I should bring this blouse with me. And each time, my eyes would catch that little red circle on the wall, and it would feel like a tiny, warm light being lit inside my chest. But on that night, after I'd heard those words from my son, I found myself standing alone in the dark kitchen long after everyone else was asleep. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator. I pulled over a small step stool, reached up, and carefully, quietly, tore that month's page from the calendar. I held my breath, trying not to make a sound, tearing it slowly, deliberately. I folded the torn page in my hands, once, then twice, until it was a small, neat square. Then I opened the junk drawer by the phone. It was filled with old receipts, used envelopes, and buttons that had lost their shirts, things that would never be used again. Without a word, I pushed the folded piece of paper deep into the clutter and slowly slid the drawer shut. If I just pretend it never happened, maybe the pain will go away, I whispered into the darkness. Then I sank down onto one of the kitchen chairs and sat there for a long time, just staring at the ceiling, feeling nothing at all. That little red circle wasn't just a date to me. It was proof. It was the symbol that told me I was still accepted, still included, that I was still a member of this family. The moment I removed it with my own 2 hands, I think I finally understood the true, crushing weight of the words, "a place to belong." And without even realizing it, I had started to cry. The next morning, I cooked scrambled eggs and bacon, acting as if nothing had happened. As the smell of breakfast filled the house, the family came downstairs, one by one, just like they always did. Morning. Yeah, morning. I looked at their faces as they sat around the table. There was no trace of guilt, no hint of apology. If anything, there was an air of relief about them, a lightness. Where am I right now? I thought. Where in the world am I? We were all in the same room, but I felt like I was standing somewhere else entirely, separated from them by an invisible wall. That afternoon, Leo came running up to me, his face bright with excitement. "Grandma, what's Florida like? Is the ocean really blue? We're gonna swim together, okay?" For a split second, the words caught in my throat. But I quickly found my smile and knelt down to his level. "Oh, I'm sure the ocean is very beautiful, sweetie," I said, stroking his hair. "I think Grandma is going to stay home and watch the house this time, but you have to promise to show me all the pictures when you get back, okay?" Leo looked up at me, his face a puzzle of confusion. "Why aren't you coming with us?" he asked. In response to his question, I could only stroke his soft hair. "The flowers in the garden will be lonely," I told him, my voice gentle. "Grandma needs to stay and give them a drink of water." That night, after the house had fallen silent, I went out into the garden again and looked up at the sky. Through a small break in the thick blanket of clouds, a few stars managed to peek through, faint and distant. "It's all right," I whispered to them, or maybe just to myself. "I'm all right." With that quiet promise, I sat there in the cool darkness, surrounded by the rich, damp smell of the earth, and I did not sleep until the first hint of dawn touched the horizon. The truth was, before I had heard those words, I had secretly begun to prepare for the trip. From the very back of the hall closet, I had retrieved the small, forgotten carry-on suitcase. At night, long after the rest of the family had gone to bed, I would quietly pack my things. My favorite lightweight cardigan, the pale blue one. A wide-brimmed sun hat I had bought years ago on a trip to Cape Cod with an old friend. A new bottle of sunscreen, a pair of comfortable sandals, a small compact mirror. "This will be perfect for the heat," I would murmur to myself, holding up a linen blouse. "I wonder if the hotel air conditioning will be too strong at night," I'd think, folding the cardigan neatly on top. With each small item, with each quiet thought, my heart had swelled with a gentle, hopeful excitement. But all of it, every last bit of that quiet joy, vanished in a matter of days, dissolving as quickly and completely as a soap bubble. The night I heard him say, "Mom, you don't need to come this time," I didn't say a word. I simply knelt on the floor of my bedroom, in front of that half-packed suitcase. One by one, I carefully took everything out. I folded the cardigan again, untied the simple ribbon on the hat, slipped the sandals back into their cloth bag, and returned each item to its proper place in my closet and drawers, as if nothing had ever happened, as if the plan had never existed in the first place. When I pulled the zipper shut on the empty suitcase, I heard a final, quiet click. And in that instant, deep inside my chest, I felt something else click shut with the very same sound. There was no one there to see it. Furious marketing. But that feeling, that precious, hopeful feeling of looking forward to something that had been alive inside me. For all those weeks, it had been real. It had existed. And when I packed it all away with my own 2 hands, burying it in the back of the closet, I think I let go of one more piece of myself. I think, perhaps, I stopped allowing myself to hope for things at all. On the morning of their departure, I woke up much earlier than usual. Perhaps it was because I hadn't really slept, or perhaps it was because some foolish, stubborn part of my heart was still clinging to a faint, impossible hope that they might change their minds. That they might say, on second thought, "Why don't you come with us after all?" As I stood in the kitchen preparing breakfast for the family, I watched my own hands moving through the steam rising from a pot on the stove, and they felt like they belonged to someone else, someone very far away. "It looks like it's going to be a beautiful day for your flight," I said, my voice bright. "I just hope you don't hit too much traffic on the way to the airport," I added, forcing a smile that felt brittle on my lips. As always, I was the one to start the conversation, the one to keep the mood light. But the replies that came back were short, clipped, and airy. They were the kind of words people use when they are carefully trying to avoid touching a delicate, painful subject. As the time for them to leave drew closer, A hurried energy filled the living room. The zip of a suitcase closing, the sound of shoes on the hardwood floor. A voice calling out, "Did you remember to pack the chargers?" Every single sound was a sound of a life that was not my own, a life I was not a part of. And each one felt like a small, sharp needle piercing my heart. "Grandma, why aren't you going?" Leo asked, wrapping his small arms around my legs as they all gathered by the front door. "I want you to come with us." His little voice, so full of innocent love, was a balm that spread a gentle warmth deep inside my chest. But at the same time, it brought with it an almost unbearable sadness, a tightness that made it hard to breathe. "Grandma has to stay home and water the flowers in the garden, sweetie," I said, my voice catching for just a moment. "They'd be so sad without me. So I'm going to stay and keep them company this time." I smiled as brightly as I could as I said it, but I could feel the stain of tears beginning to well up in my eyes, and I knew I couldn't hide it for long. Just then, a voice cut through the air from behind me. It was Sarah, my daughter-in-law. Her tone was sharp, laced with a cold thread of irritation. "Leo, come on, I told you we're leaving." That one sentence shattered the fragile moment. Leo's bright smile faltered, and his arms loosened their grip around my legs. I heard her voice. I heard it with perfect clarity. But I chose not to react. I pretended as if I hadn't heard a thing, and I continued to gently stroke my grandson's hair. I couldn't bring myself to say anything back. I couldn't ask her a question. I had no intention of doing either. Because I knew that if we exchanged words, if we allowed the tension to break the surface, the distance that had grown between us would become a solid, undeniable thing. It would hang in the air, real and visible, and I simply didn't have the courage to face that reality. Not yet. As I held my grandson's small hand in mine, I heard Michael's voice from behind me, a gentle but firm, "Let's go, buddy." Leo was gently pulled from my grasp and swept into his father's arms. I watched their backs as they walked out the door, and I prayed with every fiber of my being, "Please, just turn around." Just one look back. But no one turned around. The front door clicked shut. The sound of the suitcase wheels rolling over the concrete of the driveway echoed in the sudden quiet. Then, the sound of a car engine starting and fading into the distance. I just stood there in silence, watching the car as it pulled away from the curb and disappeared down the street. There was no, "We're leaving," called over a shoulder. There was no, "Thank you for watching the house." There was nothing. With the smile still fixed on my face, I walked over and sat down on the small stone bench beside the front door. My shoulders slumped forward just a little, and my hands, resting in my lap, began to unconsciously twist and tighten the hem of my apron. I kept my eyes fixed on the road, on the empty space where the car had been just moments before. I followed it with my eyes, with my ears, long after it was gone from sight. In the profound silence that followed, it was as if I couldn't even hear the birds singing in the trees or the rustle of the wind in the leaves. There was only time, pressing in on me like a slow, heavy tide, and then receding, leaving me stranded. I don't know how long I sat there. It was only when I noticed the cold seeping through the thin soles of my slippers that I finally, slowly, let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. And then, I whispered to the empty air, "They're gone, aren't they?" The words weren't meant for anyone, but I felt them land deep in the core of my being, sending ripples out through the silence of my own heart. For a long time after that, I couldn't move. I just sat there, my gaze fixed on a potted geranium whose leaves were trembling in the breeze. Perhaps, in that moment, I was quietly saying goodbye to something else, something I knew would never be coming back. When I finally became aware of my surroundings again, I found that I had moved. I was sitting on the small wooden bench at the far end of the garden, my body slumped against its backrest. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs in a strange, uneven rhythm. A cold sweat trickled down my spine, and my breathing had become shallow, unsatisfying little sips of air. "It's all right, you're all right," I whispered to myself, pressing a hand to my chest as if to calm the frantic bird fluttering inside. But there was no one to see me, no one to know. As the afternoon wore on and the sun began to dip toward the horizon, the doorbell never rang. My phone remained dark and silent on the kitchen counter. The only sounds in the house were the low, constant hum of the refrigerator and the soft, intermittent rustle of the curtains brushing against the window frame as a breeze passed through. And that's when it happened. A sharp, piercing pain, like a needle, shot through my chest. At first, I thought I was imagining it. I tried to take a deep, calming breath. But then a second wave of pain hit, this time deeper, stronger, and more insistent. "So, you've come back," I murmured. I didn't panic. I slowly pushed myself to my feet and walked to the small drawer next to the kitchen sink. Inside was a small amber bottle of pills from my doctor. My fingers, steady and practiced, picked out the tiny bottle. Just as I had done so many times before, I placed one small tablet under my tongue and let it dissolve. But the pain didn't subside. It began to spread, a slow, crushing pressure that tightened around the very core of my body. Still, I didn't call anyone. The thought of calling for an ambulance, of bothering a neighbor, didn't even cross my mind. I simply slid down the wall until I was sitting on the cool linoleum floor, leaning my back against the cabinets. And I looked up at the ceiling. It was plain and white, with no pattern, no texture. I stared at it as if it were a vast, empty sky. If this is how it ends, right here, quietly, maybe no one would even notice for a while. The thought drifted through my mind, detached and calm. But I didn't feel sad or frightened. If anything, a part of me felt a strange sense of relief. At least this way, I wouldn't be a bother to anyone. I wouldn't have caused a fuss. Eventually, I felt the medicine begin to work. The crushing tightness in my chest began to recede, the pain growing more distant. But the thorn that had lodged itself deep in my heart, that remained, it was something no medicine could touch. I closed my eyes, and my grandson's words echoed in the darkness of my mind. "I want you to come with us." If, in his innocent heart, the idea of family still included his grandma, then perhaps that alone was enough. That alone was my salvation. As night fell, the house remained steeped in an unnerving silence. I had turned on the television in the living room, but the words and images were just noise. I didn't hear a single thing. The sound was just there to fill the emptiness of the rooms. Over and over again, my eyes would drift, unconsciously, to my cell phone sitting on the dining room table. 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock. The minutes and hours slipped by, relentless and unforgiving. And through it all, the screen never once lit up. Well, they're on vacation, of course, I told myself. They're probably just busy having fun. Chick. I tried to reason with the ache in my chest, but underneath it all, a tiny, foolish hope flickered. Just him. If only Leo would call. Just to say, "Grandma, are you okay?" A little after 9 o'clock, I finally reached for the phone. I picked it up gently and plugged in the charging cord. The little lightning bolt icon appeared in the top right corner of the screen, and underneath it, the words I already knew were there. No missed calls. I stared at the screen for a few seconds before quietly unplugging the cord and placing the phone back in its exact spot on the table. "It's silly, isn't it? To still be hoping," I whispered. I went to the kitchen and poured hot water from the kettle into a small teacup, making myself a cup of chamomile tea. The warmth felt good as it went down my throat, and for a moment, I thought it might seep all the way down into the cold, empty space in my chest. But the phone never rang that night. Not from anyone. Not from him. Before I went to bed, I opened my journal and wrote just one sentence. "Have a wonderful trip. I pray that my sweet boy's smile never fades." The next morning, feeling a little stronger, I was out in the garden watering the plants when I paused and looked up at the sky. I made it through another day without being a burden to anyone, I thought, and that was my greatest comfort. But at the same time, a new and painful understanding was settling over me. I realized that in this house, in this family, my role had changed. I was no longer the person who was taken along. I was now the person who was left behind. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this wasn't just about a vacation. It was about something much deeper, quieter, and more painful. It was about the very shape of our family changing, and my place in it slowly, silently, disappearing. The call came 2 days into their trip, just before noon. I was in the kitchen, as usual, having just poured myself a cup of tea. I was holding the small, warm cup in my hands, about to take a moment to sit and look out at the garden. At the exact moment I set the teapot down on the counter, the telephone on the wall began to shriek with a sudden, jarring urgency. "Hello, Vance residence," I said into the receiver. The voice on the other end was a woman's, one I didn't recognize. She sounded rushed, and her voice was trembling slightly. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry to call you out of the blue. I'm with the guest services at the Ocean View Resort. It's about your grandson. He's come down with a very high fever this morning." In that instant, my fingers went numb. The teacup slipped from my grasp and shattered on the tile floor, the white porcelain scattering like fallen petals. That sharp, crashing sound seemed to awaken something deep inside me, a primal instinct that had been dormant for years. "We've taken him to see the hotel doctor," the woman continued, her voice strained. "But he keeps saying he wants his grandma. He's refusing to take any medicine, or even drink any water. He just keeps crying that he wants his grandma. We're not sure what to do." I answered without a moment's hesitation. "I understand. I'm on my way. Can you please tell me exactly where you are and give me the details?" I grabbed a notepad and a pen from the drawer, my heart beginning to hammer against my ribs as I quickly scribbled down the information. It wasn't a feeling of, "I have to go." It was a feeling of, "I am already gone." I grabbed my purse from the hook by the door, my heart medication from the drawer, and a single, small notebook from my bedside table, and stuffed them inside. "Thank you," I said into the phone, my voice clear and steady now. "I'm leaving immediately. Please, please just stay with him until I get there." As soon as I hung up the phone, I went straight to the hall closet and pulled out an old, worn duffel bag. There was no time to hesitate. I didn't grab a suitcase, or makeup, or even a change of clothes. I just took the bottle of my heart medication from the emergency kit in the bathroom, and from the back of my dresser drawer, I retrieved that small, faded notebook. Inside that notebook, in my own careful handwriting, were all of Leo's routines, his schedules, his secrets, the exact time he needed his allergy medicine, the foods he loved and the ones he wouldn't touch, the fact that he always woke up around 2 in the morning needing to use the bathroom. All the small, crucial details of his daily life that only I knew. Luggage? I didn't need any. Right now, the only things he needed were my hands and my heart. I threw on a light jacket over my house dress, and still wearing this simple slip-on sandals I wore around the house, I half walked, half ran to the nearest bus stop. Without telling a soul, without waiting for anyone's permission, I went. For him. Sometimes, the one who is left behind becomes the last line of defense. When everything else falls apart. There were no direct flights available that late in the day. I had to book a red-eye flight that connected through Atlanta, and then catch the first local bus of the morning from the airport to the resort town. At some point during the long layover, I found a little kiosk selling coffee and pre-made sandwiches. But I couldn't bring myself to take a single bite. I just sat by the gate, staring out the vast window at the darkened tarmac, praying with every beat of my aching heart. Please just let him be all right. Please, let me get there in time. By the time the sun was rising and I finally saw the sign for the local medical clinic, I realized that the hand clutching my bag was trembling uncontrollably. At the front desk, I gave them my name, and a nurse immediately led me down a quiet hallway. When she opened the door to his room, I saw him. His small body was lying in the middle of a stark white bed. An IV line was taped to his tiny arm, and a cool cloth was folded on his forehead. My vibrant, energetic boy was terrifyingly still. "Grandma?" His lips, pale and chapped, barely moved. I rushed to his side and took his hand in mine. It was hot and damp with sweat. "Grandma, you came?" "Yes, sweetie," I whispered, my voice thick with unshed tears. "Grandma's here. I'm so sorry it took me so long to get to you." At the sound of my voice, Two large tears welled up in the corners of his eyes and traced slow paths down his flushed cheeks. Then he whispered, "I had a dream that you weren't ever coming back." It was so scary. I had no words to answer him. I could only squeeze his hand tighter and begin to slowly, gently rub his back in the familiar, soothing circles he loved. "It's all right now," I murmured, my lips close to his ear. "Grandma is here. No matter what happens, I will always be right here beside you." I don't know if he heard me, or if my touch was enough, but he gave a small, weak nod. His eyes drifted shut again, his breathing finally evening out into the soft rhythm of sleep. Sitting there on the small chair beside his bed, I finally let my own tears fall. I cried silently, wiping them away with the back of my hand so that no one would see. A few minutes later, the door to the room opened quietly. My son, Michael, was standing in the doorway. His face was haggard and drawn, with dark, deep circles carved under his eyes. When he saw me sitting there, his eyes widened in disbelief. He was speechless for a few seconds, his eyes wide with a disbelief that slowly melted into something else, something heavier. And then, slowly, deliberately, he sank to his knees right there in front of me. "Mom, I'm so sorry." His voice was a raw, broken whisper. I was so wrong. I was just so wrong. And I didn't realize it until it was too late. "I'm so sorry, Mom." I shook my head, a gentle smile finding its way to my lips. It wasn't a smile of triumph, but of peace. "You don't have to apologize for anything," I said softly. "Just, if we can start walking together again from now on, that will be more than enough for me." In that small, quiet corner of a sterile hospital room, I felt as if I had found the meaning of family all over again. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that this wasn't the kind of thing that could be broken in a single night, nor was it the kind of thing that could be fixed with a single word. But as long as you held on to the belief that you could start over, that you could try again, well, I believe you can begin as many times as you need to. The hospital room was dim, steeped in the quiet hush of the late afternoon. The setting sun cast long, slanted bars of golden light through the blinds, painting silent stripes across the linoleum floor. I sat on the small chair beside the bed, continuing to speak to my grandson in a low, soothing murmur as I gently placed a fresh, damp cloth on his forehead. "It's all right now, sweetie. Grandma's here. You don't have to be scared anymore." His small hand was still hot, his skin slick with a feverish sweat. His little fingers were wrapped tightly around the cuff of my sleeve, clinging to me as if I were a lifeline. And Ma, in the midst of his feverish, disjointed muttering, I could hear one word repeated over and over again, a desperate little plea, "Grandma!" Each time I heard it, I felt a sharp, painful twist in my chest, a feeling so intense it almost took my breath away. I just kept changing the cool cloth, helping him take small sips of water, and rubbing his back in slow, steady circles. The only other sound in the room was the soft, rhythmic beeping of the IV drip, a steady metronome marking the slow, heavy passage of time in the quiet room. I didn't sleep. I sat by his side all through the night, my eyes wide open, watching for even the slightest change in his condition. Every now and then, a nurse would quietly check in on us. "Ma'am, why don't you get some rest?" she'd suggest, her voice full of a gentle kindness. But each time, I would just smile, shake my head and say, "I'll stay right here until I know he's sleeping peacefully." And then, at around 3 o'clock in the morning, I saw his eyelids flutter. He opened his eyes just a crack and whispered, his voice barely audible, "Grandma, you're here, I'm so glad." In that instant, I felt a warm, bright light ignite deep inside my chest. "Yes, sweetie, I'm here," I whispered back, gently stroking his hair. "Grandma will always be right here. So you can rest now. Just rest." That night, still holding my grandson's hand, I finally allowed myself to take a deep, full breath. It felt as if that one small, fragile voice calling for Grandma had the power to melt everything else away, the hurt in my heart, the coldness of the room, all of it. By the time dawn broke, a pale, watery light began to filter through the window of the hospital room. I had been sitting by his bedside all night long, changing the ice pack on his head, wiping the sweat from his brow, and holding his small hand while I told him old stories in a low, quiet voice. When your grandma was a little girl, we had a big apple tree in our backyard. He didn't answer, of course, but the warmth of his hand in mine, the gentle pressure of his small fingers, told me everything I needed to know. It told me, I'm still here. During the morning rounds, the doctor came in and took his temperature. The fever's broken, he said quietly. You got here just in time. He added that if it had been even a few hours later, Leo might have had a seizure. The words sent a shard of ice straight through my heart. I'm so glad I made it in time. I just kept repeating that phrase to myself, over and over, as I gently stroked my grandson's hair. I hadn't eaten anything since the day before, and I was sitting on a bench in the hallway when it happened. The door to the room opened without a sound. It was my son, Michael, standing there, his head bowed. He didn't say a word. He just walked over to me, and then, right there on the polished floor of the hospital corridor, he knelt down and lowered his head. "Aw, Mom, I am so sorry." His voice was hoarse and trembling, as weak and fragile as it used to be when he was a little boy, and I had just finished scolding him. Every single word soaked into my heart like rain into dry earth. The way I treated you, kicking you out like that, I was only thinking about myself. I never realized just how much you were holding us all together, not until now. I didn't answer him. I just stood up, slowly, and placed my hand on his bowed head. It's all right now. And then, just as I used to do all those years ago, I began to gently stroke his hair. I remembered it so clearly. When he was a little boy, crying in the middle of the night with a high fever, I would do this exact same thing. I would place my hand on his forehead and whisper, "It's okay, Mommy's right here." All this time had passed. He was a grown man now, a father himself. But I knew that the vulnerable little boy inside of him, the part of him that was still weak and afraid, still needed me. The thought filled my chest with an emotion so powerful, I couldn't put a name to it. That afternoon, I returned to my hotel room from the hospital and quietly packed my small duffel bag, the bottle of heart medication, the little notebook filled with details about Leo's life, and my bent and crumpled planner. My flight home was that evening. I didn't blame anyone. I didn't ask for anything. There was only one thing I wanted. As long as the memory of his mother's warmth remains in his heart, that's all that matters. I whispered the thought to myself as I quietly left the hospital room behind. Life is full of questions that don't have easy answers. Why did they say that to me back then? Was my presence really nothing more than a burden? But perhaps forgiveness isn't something you do for the other person. Perhaps it's an act you perform to set yourself free. The moment I placed my hand on my son's head that day, I realized I wasn't sad anymore. A few days after I returned from Florida, I noticed that the atmosphere in the house had changed, just a little. Then, one evening after dinner was over and I was in my room doing some knitting, I heard a soft knock. The door opened a crack. It was her, my daughter-in-law Sarah. She was standing there with a slightly hesitant look on her face, holding something in her hands. I was going to get this for you for Mother's Day. I'm sorry it's so late." With those words, she placed a soft, delicate scarf into my hands. It was a pale lavender, the fabric so light and airy, it felt like a piece of the spring breeze. For a moment, I was at a loss for words. There was no apology, not a direct one, but the warmth of her hands as they brushed against mine, the slight tremor in her voice, that told me more than any words could have. I gently took the scarf and spread it out across my lap, smiling. "It's so warm, thank you." In that instant, I saw the tension visibly drain from her shoulders. She hadn't used words. She had shown me with her actions. Then that was enough. Maybe forgiveness isn't some grand, dramatic gesture. Maybe it starts with something as simple as this, a single, quiet exchange that says, "We can talk again." That night, I wrapped the new scarf around my neck and made myself a cup of tea. The soft fabric felt like a gentle spring night against my skin, its warmth seeping deep into my chest. Before all of this, my bed was a folded-up cot in the corner of the living room, right next to the sofa. Every night, I would curl up on it, trying to make myself as small as possible. But that evening, my son spoke to me, his voice quiet but clear. "Mom, I cleaned out the old spare room. From now on, I was hoping you'd make it your room." A wave of surprise and confusion washed over me, and at the same time, a warmth began to spread through my chest, so powerful that I felt tears welling up in my eyes. Thank you. No other words were needed. I gently pushed the door open. Oh, I was looking at a new room, prepared just for me. The faint, clean scent of fresh linens filled the air. By the window, there was a small vase with a single flower in it, and pale pink curtains swayed gently in the breeze. In the center of the room, a single bed was neatly made, and on the small nightstand next to it sat a little lamp and a drawing. One, that I was sure was from Leo. I slowly walked over to the bed and ran my hand over the quilt. The warmth that seeped into my palm seemed to spread right through me, deep into my heart. I walked to the window, rested my hand on the sill, and whispered to myself, "No. So this is my place now. For 10 years. For 10 long years, I had made myself small in the corner of the living room. Every time guests came over, I would quickly pack away my things, trying to erase any sign of my presence, as if I were someone who wasn't really there. Yeah. But this was different. I had my own room. I felt as if, finally, I was being accepted as someone who was supposed to be here. Someone whose presence was a given. In that moment, a hot sting started behind my eyes. I just smiled, a small, quiet smile, and looked up at the sky outside the window. It was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and it felt as if it were saying, "Welcome home." That night, as I lay quietly in my new bed, I looked up at the ceiling and thought to myself, maybe, finally, I feel like it's okay for me to be here. The next morning, I heard the pitter-patter of little feet coming from the kitchen. "Grandma, I made you some tea." Leo came into my room, carefully carrying a teacup with both hands. The sight of him, concentrating so hard on not spilling a single drop, was so endearing that I couldn't help but smile as I gently took his hands in mine. "Thank you, sweetie. You did such a wonderful job." He looked up at me then, his eyes wide and serious, and said, "Grandma, you're my hero. If it weren't for you, I don't think I would have ever gotten better." I felt something deep inside my chest begin to melt, slowly and warmly. I think about it sometimes. I wonder if, in my constant effort to be useful to the family, I had forgotten about my own feelings, leaving them behind somewhere along the way. But if I can have mornings like this, holding his hand and drinking a warm cup of tea, then that is more than enough happiness for one lifetime. It was the first time since the trip that we had all sat down at the dinner table together. For the first time in a very long time, all four of us were sharing an evening meal, and I wasn't sitting in my usual seat at the far end of the table. I was sitting in the middle. In front of me was a bowl of warm chicken noodle soup, a plate of freshly baked bread, and a steaming dish of roasted vegetables. Without a word, my son reached over and gently placed a piece of chicken on my plate. "This is your favorite, Mom." At the sound of his voice, I had to look down at my plate to hide the smile that spread across my face. From my side, Leo was happily chattering away as he ate. "Grandma, you should have some of this too," he said, beaming. His innocent smile warmed me from the inside out. I happened to glance up, and I saw her, Sarah, looking at me from across the table. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. There were no words exchanged, but in her eyes, I saw it. I saw a willingness to accept, a decision to try. The only sounds were the soft clinking of silverware against plates. The warm light from the fixture above cast a gentle glow on our faces. The sound of forks and knives, the steam rising from the soup bowls, my grandson's happy chatter. Nothing extraordinary was happening. But I knew that this quiet was the very thing that had been missing for so long. The respect and the love that were held within that silence. They sank into my heart more deeply than any words ever could. That night, every time I set my fork down, I whispered a silent thank you in my heart. D. Thank you. Thank you for letting me sit here again. One night, just before he drifted off to sleep, Leo whispered to me, "Next time, Grandma, you have to come with us. It doesn't matter where we go, as long as the whole family goes together." Lying there in the darkness, I gave a small nod. Yes, all of us together. In that moment, I felt a small light flicker to life deep inside me, and I understood just how precious that simple idea was. How much it meant after all these long years. People sometimes have to come close to losing something precious before they finally realize its true worth, before they understand what a gift it is for someone to simply be there, before they realize that the things we take for granted are nothing short of miracles. I suppose I was one of those people. And now, every evening as I sip my tea, I think to myself, I'm so glad I'm in this house. I'm so glad I didn't close off my heart. I'm so glad I didn't give up on forgiveness. I did it not for anyone else, but for my own life. That night, long after everyone else was asleep, I turned off the main light in my room, leaving only the small lamp on my nightstand lit. From the back of a drawer, I took out that little notebook. It was the same worn journal I had hurriedly stuffed into my bag on the night I left for Florida. The corners were slightly bent, and there was a sticker with Leo's name on the cover. I slowly turned the pages until I reached the last blank one, and I began to write. I feel like I can start walking with this family again. After I wrote the words, I just stared at them for a long time. A single tear escaped and traced a path down my cheek, falling onto the page with a soft blot. But it wasn't a tear of sadness. It was a warm, gentle drop of a new beginning. I closed the notebook, held it to my chest with both hands, and looked up at the ceiling. It wasn't directed at anyone in particular, but I whispered it in my heart. Thank you. I feel like I've become part of a family again. Then, I turned off the lamp and closed my eyes. The moonlight filtering through the gap in the curtains filled the room with a soft, gentle glow. It was so different from the lonely darkness of that other night. This was a warm, peaceful night, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could truly say the words, "Good night." As the night deepened and the house fell quiet, I lay in my bed, staring up at the darkened ceiling. Every time I pictured my grandson's sleeping face, a gentle warmth would spread through my chest. Those days when I felt forgotten. The times I convinced myself I was no longer needed. But that one small voice had called me back. Perhaps a place to belong within a family isn't something that's given to you. Perhaps it's something that slowly takes shape as you continue to believe and to wait. And so, today, just like any other day, I will go to the kitchen. Even if no one says thank you, I'll keep making that pot of coffee in the morning, believing that one warm cup might just be warming someone's heart. To you, the one reading this story, is there someone you've been forgetting? Have you taken a moment to truly see that person who has been quietly standing by your side all this time? Had you ever told your parents, "Thank you for still being here"? Have you stopped to remember that person in your family, the one who was always the quietest? If any of this has touched your heart, please leave a comment below. To be remembered, even if I was not invited, is a joy in itself. And if this story might serve as a reason for you to remember someone you love, I would be so grateful if you would share it. Finally, I hope that a single, warm memory is lit within your heart today. And I hope that we can continue to weave the rest of this story together. Please subscribe, and I hope to see you again in the next chapter. For that moment when you feel the sudden urge to see someone you love,